It is the year 230 BC, and the sun reflecting off the Adriatic Sea is about to witness an act that will shatter the peace of the ancient world. You are Lucius Coruncanius, a representative of the Roman Republic, standing on the swaying deck of a foreign ship, surrounded by the smell of salt, tar, and hostile sweat. You have come to the barbarian court not to negotiate, but to issue a command to the pirate Queen Teuta. You believe the weight of your toga and the authority of the Senate are enough to make these savages tremble. But as you stare into the Queen's eyes, you do not see fear. You see the cold, flat gaze of a predator looking at prey. The silence on the deck is heavy, broken only by the creaking of timber and the lap of waves against the hull. You deliver your threat, sneering that Rome will teach her the laws of nations, expecting her to bow. She does not. She smiles, a thin, razor-sharp expression that chills the blood in your veins, and dismisses you with a languid wave of her hand. You turn to leave, your sandals slapping against the wood, your chest puffed with indignation, believing the matter unsettled, but the message delivered. You are wrong. As you step onto the gangplank, blinded by the glare of the water, you never see the shadow detaching itself from the hull. There is no warning, only the sudden, searing heat of steel tearing through your throat. The world spins. You try to speak, to scream, but your mouth fills with the copper taste of your own blood. You collapse onto the rough planks, gargling your last breath while the Queen's guards watch with stone-faced indifference. You are the first Roman diplomat to be butchered in cold blood in decades. And as the light fades from your eyes, you have no way of knowing that your death has just ignited a war with the most dangerous sailors in history, the Illyrians. If you possess a thirst for the forgotten chapters of human endurance and the brutal realities of the ancient past, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Join us as we dissect the history that others overlook. That murder in 230 BC was not merely a crime. It was a geopolitical earthquake that shook the foundations of the Mediterranean. Rome had just emerged from the First Punic War, having strangled the life out of the Carthaginian Empire, and the Senate was intoxicated with its own power. To the Roman elite, the Mediterranean was their private lake, and the tribes across the Adriatic were nothing more than insects buzzing around the head of a lion. But they had miscalculated. While the Roman legions were drilling in the dust of Italy, perfecting the rigid discipline of infantry combat, the Illyrians were rewriting the laws of naval engagement. Operating from the jagged, island-choked coast of modern-day Dalmatia, the RDEI tribe had transformed piracy from a nuisance into a state-sponsored industry. This was not simple banditry. It was a survival strategy born from the earth itself. The rocky, unforgiving soil of the Balkans could not support vast fields of grain, so the people turned their eyes to the blue horizon. They harvested the sea with the same desperation that a farmer plows his field. Every merchant vessel daring to sail from Greece to Italy had to run the gauntlet of their hunting grounds. Under the command of King Agrian, these desperate raiding parties had been forged into a terrifying confederacy. Agrian was a warlord of the old school, a man of immense appetites and violent charisma. Following a crushing victory against the Aetolians, he celebrated with such ferocious intensity, drinking massive quantities of unmixed wine, that his body collapsed into pleurisy. Within days, the king was dead, leaving the throne and the command of the RDEI to his wife, Queen Teuta. Rome looked at this transition of power and saw weakness. The Senate received harrowing reports of Italian merchants being dragged from their decks in chains, sold into slavery in markets they would never leave. They assumed a widow regent would be pliable, easy to intimidate. They dispatched the Coruncanius brothers, two aristocrats dripping with Roman arrogance, to the city of Scadra. The meeting was a disaster of cultural misunderstanding. The Romans demanded Teuta halt the piracy instantly. Teuta looked at them with genuine bafflement. In her culture, piracy was a legitimate trade, a private enterprise no different than pottery or fishing. She explained calmly that it was not the custom of Illyrian royalty to prevent their subjects from earning a living. The younger Coruncanius snapped, hurling insults at her, her laws, and her people, treating a sovereign queen like a disobedient servant. Teuta did not explode in a rage. She simply decided that such insolence required a permanent, bloody correction. When the news of the assassination reached the Forum in Rome, the silence was absolute. Killing an envoy was a violation of the most sacred laws of humanity. It was an act of war so personal that it bypassed all debate. The legions were mobilized, and the heavy fleet was launched. Rome prepared to crush the barbarian queen. However, as the massive Roman quinquiremes lumbered into the Adriatic, they discovered a terrifying reality. They were not sailing into open water. They were sailing into a labyrinth. To understand why this war became a nightmare, one must look away from the marble of Rome and gaze at the geography of the ancient Balkans. The kingdom of the Ardii was carved into the living rock of the Dalmatian coast. The Dinaric Alps formed a massive, impenetrable wall separating the coast from the interior, a nightmare of logistical bottlenecks for any invading army. But for a pirate, this terrain was a fortress built by the gods. The coastline is a fractured mosaic of over 1,000 islands, hidden coves, and deep, twisting fjords. A ship could vanish into this maze in seconds, shielded by towering limestone cliffs that plunged vertically into the sea. This harsh environment dictated their economy and their warfare. For the tribes living here, raiding was a necessity of life. The Ardii kingdom rose to power by mastering this chaotic environment. Under the late King Agron, they had centralized the loose collection of tribes into a formidable machine. Agron did not just lead raids, he taxed them. He built a protection racket on a geopolitical scale. When Teuta assumed the regency for her young stepson, Pins, she inherited this volatile engine. Her position was precarious. In the hypermasculine warrior culture of the Illyrians, a leader maintained power solely through the distribution of loot. If Teuta had bowed to Rome, she would have cut off the flow of gold and slaves that kept her chieftains loyal. She would have faced a mutiny before the Romans even arrived. Her refusal was a calculation for political survival. She authorized aggressive expansion southwards, besieging the island of Issa and attacking the city of Epidamnos. These were not disorganized brawls. The Illyrians employed siege engines, coordinated infantry maneuvers, and psychological warfare. The court at Skadra reflected this martial intensity. It was a place where wine flowed as freely as blood. The Illyrians were infamous throughout antiquity for their drinking culture, consuming unmixed wine in quantities that appalled the Greeks. It was in this atmosphere of intoxicated aggression that Teuta held court, surrounded by warriors who measured a leader's worth by the terror they could inflict. Rome saw a barbarian woman. In reality, they were facing a cornered tiger. Teuta controlled a network of fortified harbors stretching from modern-day Split down to Durrës. Her empire was a decentralized hydra. You could burn one village, but the fleet would simply slip behind an island, waiting for the storm to pass. The Romans were bringing a sledgehammer to kill a swarm of wasps. When the Roman navy finally launched its counterattack, they brought the heavyweight champions of the Mediterranean, the quinquiremes. These were floating fortresses powered by nearly 300 oarsmen, designed to smash into enemy hulls with the force of a battering ram. A single Roman ship was a masterpiece of engineering, carrying 120 marines ready to board and slaughter. But the Adriatic was not the open ocean deep within the shipyards of the Illyrians. A tribe known as the Liburnians had perfected a weapon that would change maritime history. They called it the limbus. If the Roman ship was a sledgehammer, the limbus was a switchblade. It was small, undecked, and powered by a single bank of oars, usually with only 50 men. It had no heavy ram, no towering castles, and no heavy armor. To a Roman admiral, it looked like a toy. This underestimation was fatal. The limbus possessed one attribute that the Romans could not replicate: blistering speed. These vessels had a shallow draft, allowing them to skim over hidden reefs and vanish up river deltas where the heavy Roman keels would run aground. In the choppy, unpredictable waters of the coast, the limbus danced while the Roman giants stumbled. The Illyrian tactics were a form of naval guerrilla warfare. They never lined up for the decisive battles the Romans adored. Instead, they operated in wolf packs. 4 or 5 lembi would rush a single isolated Roman transport. They didn't ram, they swarmed. Using their speed, they would pull alongside, lash the ships together, and flood the enemy deck with fierce infantry before the Romans could even rotate their heavy ballistae. It was a nightmare of mathematics. A Roman warship cost a fortune and took months to crew. An Illyrian lembus could be built in weeks from local timber and crewed by fishermen. Teuta could lose 10 ships to sink 1 Roman vessel and still win the exchange. This technology was so effective that it terrified the merchant world. Raids were reported as far south as the Peloponnese. The Illyrians had democratized naval violence. Rome found itself boxing with a shadow. The legions would land on an island only to find the villages empty and the fleet already gone, sailing downwind to raid the supply lines the Romans had just left behind. The invincible Roman navy was bleeding from 1,000 paper cuts. The Senate realized too late that they weren't just fighting a nation. They were fighting a methodology to win. They needed more than wood and iron. They needed treachery. In 229 BC, the Roman Republic stopped swatting at the flies and decided to burn down the forest. The Senate authorized a force terrifying in its excess. 200 warships and 20,000 infantry led by both consuls simultaneously. This was not a policing action. It was an annihilation force. The sheer displacement of water caused by the Roman fleet as it crossed the Strait of Otranto sent a vibration through the hull of every Illyrian ship. The game was over, but the war would not be decided by a clash of prows. It would be decided in the mind of one man, Demetrius of Pharos. Demetrius was Queen Teuta's most capable general, entrusted with the defense of Corcyra, modern-day Corfu, the strategic key to the Adriatic. He commanded a garrison that could have held out for months. But Demetrius possessed a trait common among successful pirates, a total lack of loyalty to anything but his own survival. As the Roman armada darkened the horizon, blocking out the morning sun, Demetrius did the math. He saw Teuta's regency crumbling. He saw the infinite resources of Rome. Instead of ordering his archers to man the walls, he sent a rowboat to the Roman flagship. The deal was struck in whispers. Demetrius surrendered Corcyra without a single drop of blood being spilled. In exchange, the Romans promised to install him as a client king. It was a masterstroke of statecraft. With Corcyra gone, the Illyrian defense line shattered like glass. The Roman legions landed and swept north, acting less like an army and more like a force of nature. City after city, Epidamnos, Apollonia, Issa, threw open their gates to distance themselves from the pirate queen. The Romans accepted their surrenders and kept marching, driving Teuta further into the wild interior. Teuta herself retreated to the fortress of Rhizon, tucked deep inside the twisting bay of Kotor. It was a natural stronghold, but she was isolated. Her allies had defected, her fleet was scattered, and her trusted general was now guiding the Roman legions to her doorstep. In 228 BC, she capitulated. The peace treaty was humiliating. Teuta was forced to abdicate her claims, pay a crippling tribute, and accept a limit on her navy. No more than 2 unarmed Illyrian ships were allowed to sail south of Lissus. The pirate empire was grounded. Rome declared victory, packed up its legions, and sailed home, leaving Demetrius of Pharos in charge as a puppet. But they had forgotten a fundamental rule of keeping wild animals. A wolf that bites its master once will inevitably bite again. Demetrius didn't want to be a puppet. He wanted to be a king. While Rome turned his back to face a new threat rising in Carthage, the traitor began to sharpen his knives. History rarely offers a perfect villain, but Demetrius comes close. He was the ultimate survivor, a man who viewed loyalty as a currency to be spent. While Rome was paralyzed by the news that a Carthaginian general named Hannibal was marching war elephants toward the Alps, Demetrius decided to cash in his chips. He tore up the peace treaty of 228 BC. He didn't just cross the forbidden line of Lissus. He sailed past it with 50 warships, raiding the Cyclades and terrorizing Roman allies. He forged an alliance with King Philip V of Macedonia, creating a bridge between the chaotic naval power of the Illyrians and the disciplined phalanxes of the East. This was Rome's nightmare. The Second Illyrian War was Rome's frantic attempt to close the back door before the house burned down. They dispatched Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a consul of grim efficiency. The campaign was a masterclass in siege warfare. In a single week, the impregnable fortress of Dimale was stormed. The speed caught Demetrius off guard. He retreated to his home island of Pharos, confident his fortifications would hold. But the Romans staged a fake landing to draw his troops out, then ambushed them from the rear caught in a pincer. The king saw his army evaporate true to his nature. Demetrius didn't die with his men. He slipped away to a waiting ship and fled to Macedonia. Rome had won again, securing the Adriatic just in time to face Hannibal. But by letting Demetrius escape, they allowed a virus to spread. Demetrius would spend his life whispering poison into the ear of the Macedonian king, encouraging Philip to attack Rome when it was weakest. The snake had been chased out of the grass, but had found a new garden to infest. Fast forward 50 years to 168 BC. Rome was now the apex predator of the Mediterranean. But in the Illyrian capital of Scadra, a new king named Gentius was about to make the same old mistake. The Third Illyrian War wasn't started by ambition. It was started by con artists. The king of Macedonia, Perseus, was desperate for allies against Rome. He looked at Gentius and saw a useful idiot. Perseus offered the Illyrian king a staggering sum of 300 talents of silver to switch sides. The negotiation was a tragic comedy. Gentius, wary of empty promises, demanded to see the money first. Perseus's envoys brought the silver to Illyria, allowing Gentius to stamp his royal seal on the wax, safeguarding the treasure. Satisfied, Gentius committed the act of no return. He arrested 2 Roman ambassadors and threw them into a dungeon. But the moment news of the arrests reached Macedonia, Perseus pulled the rug out. He ordered the bearers of the silver to turn around and bring the money back. He reasoned that Gentius was now already at war with Rome and didn't need to be paid to fight. Gentius had sold his kingdom for a fortune he never touched. The Roman response was terrifying in its speed. The Senate sent the praetor Anicius Gallus. He launched a blitzkrieg that would make modern generals envious. The entire war lasted only 30 days. Let that sink in. The Illyrian kingdom, which had terrified the Adriatic for a century, was dismantled in a single month. Gentius retreated behind the massive Cyclopean walls of Scadra. His army was demoralized, his treasury empty. He asked for a 3-day truce, hoping for a relief army that never came. He spent those 3 days likely drinking heavily, watching the horizon. When the truce expired, he walked out of the gates, fell to his knees in the dust, and begged for his life. Rome was not merciful. The kingdom was dissolved. Gentius and his family were shackled and paraded through the streets of Rome. As the crowds cheered, the independent history of Illyria came to a whimpering end. But for the common people, the real horror was just beginning. When the legions marched home, they left behind something far more dangerous than soldiers: the accountants. Rome did not annex Illyria to build schools. They came to drain it. The Senate applied their favorite formula: divide et impera, divide and rule. The kingdom was sliced into 3 separate districts. Rome forbade marriage and trade between them. The goal was to shatter the national identity. But political division was just the appetizer. The main course was economic extraction. The Romans arrived with an insatiable hunger for silver, and the Balkans were sitting on veins of it. The Senate leased the mines to private corporations known as the publicani. These were the venture capitalists of the ancient world, armed with swords. They paid the state up front, which meant every denarius they squeezed out of the population was pure profit. The result was industrial-scale horror. Thousands of Illyrian warriors, once the proud masters of the Adriatic, were marched into the dark, suffocating tunnels of the silver mines. Working conditions were a slow death sentence. The tunnels were narrow, unventilated, and lit only by flickering oil lamps that burned up the scarce oxygen. Miners worked in shifts that lasted for days, chipping away at the rock while inhaling silica dust that turned their lungs to stone. If the rock didn't kill them, the brutality did. The Publicani employed private security forces who enforced quotas with whips. There was no oversight. There were no human rights. There was only the quota. The wealth extracted from these hills paved the streets of Rome and funded the gladiator games. But back in Illyria, the Pax Romana felt like a suffocating blanket. The Publicani seized land, confiscated livestock, and levied taxes on everything from the columns in your house to the number of slaves you owned. If you couldn't pay, you became the commodity. For over a century, the pressure built. The Illyrians were beaten, divided, and enslaved. But they were not broken. Beneath the surface, in the secret mountain passes and the deep forests where the tax collectors dared not go, the old stories were still told. The memory of the Limbus and the freedom of the sea didn't die. It went underground. Rome thought they were managing a colony. In reality, they were sitting on a powder keg, and the fuse was burning down toward the greatest explosion the empire would ever face. By 6 AD, the Roman Republic had become an empire ruled by Augustus. The world seemed stable. But in the mountains of Illyria, the pressure cooker was about to explode. The spark was a recruitment drive. Rome was planning a massive invasion of Germany and needed bodies. They turned to their warlike subjects in the Balkans, demanding a levy of auxiliary troops. The Illyrians gathered as ordered. They stood in their formations, holding Roman-issued swords, wearing Roman armor, drilled in Roman tactics. But as they looked at the recruiting officers barking orders, a dangerous realization swept through the ranks. We are armed. We are trained. And there are more of us than them. The rebellion began not with a whisper, but with a roar. Led by a chieftain named Bateau, the Decitiate, the Illyrians turned their weapons against their officers. Within days, the revolt spread like wildfire. Another leader, Bateau of the Bruci, joined the cause. The two Bateaus united the tribes in a way Agron never could. This was the Bellum Battonianum, the War of the Bateaus. It wasn't a border skirmish. It was an existential crisis. The rebels were marching on Italy. Panic gripped Rome. For the first time in centuries, the Senate debated in terror. Emperor Augustus declared that unless drastic measures were taken, the enemy could be within sight of Rome within 10 days. The empire went into total mobilization. Rome stripped the provinces of garrisons and bought freedom for thousands of slaves just to put bodies in uniforms. The future Emperor Tiberius was recalled from the German front. What followed was the most brutal conflict Rome would fight until the barbarian invasions. Rome fielded 15 legions, nearly 200,000 men, to crush a piece of land the size of modern Bosnia. The war dragged on for 3 bloody years. The Illyrians fought with the ferocity of men who knew this was their last chance. They lured the heavy Roman columns into mountain ambushes, cutting off supply lines. Rome couldn't win by battle, so they won by starvation. Tiberius adopted a scorched earth policy, burning every village, slaughtering every herd of cattle, and destroying every crop. Finally, in 9 AD, Bateau the Decitiate surrendered at the fortress of Andetrium. When Tiberius asked him why his people had rebelled with such savagery, Bateau delivered one of history's most cutting lines. "You Romans are to blame, for you sinned as guardians of your flocks, not dogs or shepherds, but wolves." The revolt was crushed, but the cost was astronomical. The Illyrians had proven they were the toughest fighters in the world. Rome, ever the pragmatist, decided that if they couldn't destroy this spirit, they would buy it. 2 centuries after Bateau's revolt, the Roman Empire was not ruling the world. It was being eaten alive. This was the crisis of the 3rd century, a 50-year nightmare of civil war, plague, and invasion. The soft elites of the Senate were powerless. The empire had split into 3 fractured chunks. But salvation didn't come from the noble families of Italy. It came from the hard, limestone hills of the Balkans. After the Great Revolt, Rome had learned its lesson. They recruited the Illyrians. The legions became filled with men from Dalmatia and Pannonia, men who grew up in the saddle, worshipped soldier gods, and viewed war as a natural state. By the mid-3rd century, the Roman army was effectively an Illyrian army. And since the army now chose the emperor, the barbarians effectively took over the throne. Enter Aurelian, born to a humble peasant family in Illyria. He rose through the ranks not by lineage, but by the sheer number of enemies he killed. His men called him Manu ad Ferrum, hand on hilt, because he was never without his weapon. When he seized the purple in 270 AD, he inherited a corpse. The empire was broken. The Goths were ravaging the north. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra had stolen the wealthy east, and a breakaway Gallic empire controlled the west. Aurelian didn't negotiate. He went to work. In a whirlwind campaign that lasted just 5 years, he did the impossible. He crushed the Goths. He marched east and shattered Zenobia's armies in the Syrian desert. He turned west and forced the Gallic usurpers to their knees. He stitched the bleeding pieces of the map back together with iron thread. When he returned to Rome, the Senate had no choice but to bow before this rough-spoken soldier and grant him the title Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. Aurelian was just the beginning. He was followed by Emperor Diocletian, another Illyrian who fundamentally reorganized the empire to survive for another 1,000 years. The irony is staggering. The very people Rome had tried to exterminate in the pirate wars had become the only ones strong enough to save the idea of Rome. The Illyrians didn't just conquer the empire from within, they became the empire. The wolves had become the shepherds without them. The light of Western civilization would have been extinguished centuries earlier. The final victory of the Illyrians was not written in blood, but in stone. In the early 4th century, Constantine the Great, born in Nisus, a city deep in the heart of the Illyrian lands, made a decision that would dictate the course of history. He decided that Rome was no longer worthy of being the capital of the world. He looked east. He built a new Rome on the Bosphorus, a city that would bear his name, Constantinople. This was the ultimate subversion. The Illyrian emperors didn't just save the empire, they stole it. They took the center of gravity away from the Italian aristocrats who had once called them pirates and moved it to their own backyard. The Byzantine Empire that followed, which preserved the light of classical civilization for another 1,000 years, was built on foundations laid by Illyrian pragmatism. Even Justinian the Great, the emperor who codified the laws that still underpin modern legal systems, was born a peasant in the Illyrian region of Dardania. So what happened to the people themselves? Did they vanish? History is often written by the conquerors, and when the Slavs swept into the Balkans in the 6th and 7th centuries, the Illyrian name faded from maps. But a people who survived the Greeks, the Celts, and the Romans do not simply disappear. Linguists and historians trace a direct line from the ancient Illyrians to the modern Albanian people. The Albanian language is a unique branch on the Indo-European tree, a living fossil that likely preserves the speech of the tribes that once defied the legions in the high mountains of Albania and Kosovo. The traditions of the clan, the fierce code of honor, and the unyielding spirit of independence echo the world of Queen Teuta and King Agrin. The story of the Illyrians is the ultimate underdog epic. They started as the enemies of Rome, the other, the barbarian, the pirate. They were hunted, defeated, partitioned, and enslaved. But they refused to be erased. They infiltrated the very machine that tried to crush them, climbed to the highest throne in the world, and steered the ship of civilization through its darkest storm. When Lucius Coruncanius sneered at Queen Teuta on that fateful day in 230 BC, he thought he was looking at a savage. He couldn't have known that he was looking at the ancestors of Rome's future saviors. The eagle may have landed in Italy, but for centuries, its wings were kept aloft by the sons of Illyria. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lost empire of the Adriatic, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It tells the algorithm that history matters. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Rome would have survived without the barracks emperors, or was the empire doomed regardless? Let's debate it below. Until next time, keep looking for the truth in the shadows.